Picture this. A late afternoon at an airport, where the last rays of golden sunlight slip through thick glass windows, casting a warm glow across the polished floors that reflect the world like a mirror. The air hums with the steady drone of announcements crackling over the loudspeaker, calling out flight numbers and destinations, mingling with the low murmur of travelers, a hurried shuffle of suitcase wheels, the soft buzz of phones, and the occasional burst of a child's laughter that fades as quickly as it comes. Amid this restless sea of motion stands one man, a figure so still he seems almost out of place, like an ancient oak rooted deep in the chaos of a storm. His name is Samuel Jackson, but to those who've crossed paths with him, that name carries more than just identity. It's a testament to patience, to dignity forged through decades in a world that hasn't always been kind to him. Headphone, welcome to Soul Deep Stories. Glowing star, if you're deeply immersed in this story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss more heart-touching stories. Sparkling heart. Pushpin, I have a small challenge for you. Comment below and let us know which country you're listening from and what time it is. For example, I'm in New York, USA, enjoying this story at 9 p.m. Crescent Moon. How about you? Let's connect with each other from all around the world. Globe showing Europe, Africa sparkles. Speech balloon, don't forget to like and share to spread these meaningful stories to more people. Thank you for being a part of Soul Deep Stories. Red heart. Samuel moves through the crowd with deliberate steps, his old leather shoes, worn but meticulously polished, tapping softly against the tiles. He wears a brown suit, the cuffs slightly frayed, but it's pressed with care, as though he spent the morning smoothing out every wrinkle to make himself presentable for this moment. In his hands he clutches a battered book, its cover faded and edges curling, the pages yellowed by time, yet he holds it like a priceless treasure. His eyes, framed by deep lines etched by years of quiet endurance, shimmer with a subtle joy, a joy only those who've waited for something precious can truly understand. Today he isn't boarding a plane for business or leisure. He's flying to see his grandson Ethan, a boy he hasn't held since Ethan was a toddler scampering around his backyard nearly 2 decades ago. Ethan, now grown and working in the airline industry, had saved every penny to buy Samuel a first-class ticket, a surprise gift delivered with a simple message, "You deserve this." Samuel had chuckled when he read it, a rare smile softening the creases on his weathered face. As he boards the plane, the first-class cabin greets him with understated luxury, plush leather seats, ample legroom, and the faint strains of classical music drifting from hidden speakers overhead. Samuel sets his small travel bag on the floor, careful not to disturb anyone, and settles into his assigned seat, 2A, right by the window. He fastens his seatbelt, adjusts the reading glasses perched on his nose, and opens his book. His hands, rough from years of hard labor, tremble slightly as he turns the fragile pages. He's in no rush. For Samuel, every moment is worth savoring, and this flight, this first time in his life sitting in first class, a place he'd only ever glimpsed while seeing others off, feels like a quiet victory he wants to hold on to. But that peace doesn't last long. The sharp click of high heels echoes across the cabin floor, each step a drumbeat signaling something ominous. Samuel looks up, his gaze meeting the eyes of a woman, Flight Attendant Catherine Evans. Catherine, her blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun, her navy uniform crisp and hugging her frame, her lips pressed into a thin, cold line, approaches him like a judge about to deliver a verdict. She stops in front of his seat, her icy blue eyes scanning him from head to toe, from his lined face to the gnarled hands cradling his book, lingering on his polished but worn-out shoes. A smirk flickers across her lips, so faint it's almost imperceptible, but it's enough to thicken the air around them with unease. "You," she says, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade, dripping with suspicion she doesn't bother to hide. "I need to see your boarding pass." No greeting, no trace of the courtesy you'd expect from a first-class attendant. Samuel blinks, caught off guard, but he maintains his composure. "Of course," he replies, his tone low and gentle as if speaking to an old friend. He reaches into his suit pocket, retrieves the neatly folded boarding pass, and hands it to her with both hands, a gesture of respect he's carried since youth. He offers a small smile, expecting her to check it and move on. But Catherine doesn't. She takes the pass, flipping it back and forth as if hunting for a typo or a forgery. Her brows knit together, her lips tighten, and then she looks up at him, her gaze no longer just skeptical, it's outright contemptuous. "This is a first-class ticket?" she asks, her words slow and deliberate, each syllable laced with mockery. Samuel nods, still calm. "Yes, my grandson got it for me. He wanted me to have a comfortable trip." There's a hint of pride in his voice, a belief that this explanation will clear up any doubt. Catherine doesn't buy it. She lets out a short, harsh laugh, the sound sharp enough to sting. Your grandson, huh? Really? She shakes her head, her eyes raking over him again, from the frayed suit to the old shoes. Then, as if unable to contain the disdain bubbling inside her, she leans in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Listen here, you old fool, she hisses, her words crude and cutting. Who the hell do you think you are, sitting here? Trash like you needs to crawl back to the filthy seats in the back. Don't stink up my first-class cabin. Samuel freezes. For a moment, time seems to stop. Her words, jagged and cruel, slice into his dignity like a rusty knife. He's heard things like this before, not once, not twice, but too many times to count. But here, in a space he'd thought might treat him as an equal, they hit harder than he expects. And then, as if her words aren't enough, Catherine does something unthinkable. With a sneer, she spits. A thick glob of saliva lands on the floor beside his feet, splattering onto the edge of his carefully polished shoes. Look at those damn shoes, she taunts, her voice dripping with disgust. They're as pathetic as you are. Get out of my sight, you piece of garbage. The cabin grows stiflingly silent. A few nearby passengers glance up, their eyes flickering with curiosity, but no one speaks. A middle-aged man in a gray suit coughs lightly and turns away, unwilling to get involved. A young woman 2 rows back pauses mid-scroll on her phone, her fingers hovering, but she stays mute. They see it all, the insult, the spit, the vulgar outburst, but no one steps in. Samuel feels their stares, those sneaky, half-interested looks, and he knows, he's always known, that in moments like this he's often alone. His hands tighten around the book, his rough fingers trembling not from fear but from something deeper, a wound buried beneath years of restraint. He wants to say something, to ask why she's treating him this way, but he doesn't. Samuel learned long ago that silence is sometimes the only way to hold on to what's left of your pride. He takes a deep breath, steadying his voice. I have a valid ticket, he says, soft but firm. You can check it again. Catherine laughs again, louder this time, as if his words are a ridiculous joke. Check it again? I don't need to check a damn thing, she snaps, her tone shrill with arrogance. I can tell just by looking at you, you don't belong here. Stop arguing. Get up, grab your ratty little bag and haul your ass to economy now, or I'll have security drag you out. She crosses her arms, standing tall, her eyes boring down on him like he's an insect beneath her heel. Samuel doesn't respond immediately. He lowers his gaze to the spit still glistening on his shoe, then slowly lifts his eyes to meet hers. There's no anger in his expression, no hatred, just a calm so profound it's beyond her comprehension. He's lived through worse days than this, faced harsher slights, and each time he's chosen to rise above rather than sink. But this time it's different. This isn't just a personal attack, it's an assault on something his grandson Ethan worked hard to give him. A moment of being treated like he matters. And now, Catherine is trampling it without even knowing what she stepped into. He unbuckles his seatbelt with slow, trembling hands, still maintaining an astonishing composure. He picks up his small bag, tucks the book inside and stands. But before he moves, he does something Catherine doesn't expect. He pulls his phone from his pocket, his fingers carefully typing a brief message to Ethan. They told me to move to economy. The attendant said I don't belong here. No plea for help, no rant, just a plain statement. He slips the phone back into his pocket, meets Catherine's gaze one last time, his eyes carrying a silent warning she can't decipher. Go on, move it, Catherine barks, jabbing a finger toward the back of the plane. Don't make me say it again. Samuel doesn't resist. He walks away, each step slow but steady, his old shoes clicking faintly on the floor. As he passes, a few passengers lower their heads, avoiding his gaze as if ashamed of their own silence but too cowardly to act. The man in the gray suit mutters something to his seatmate, while the young woman resumes scrolling, pretending nothing happened. Samuel takes a cramped seat in economy, near a window where he can see the plane's wing and the darkening sky beyond. He sets his bag down, his hands resting on his knees. He doesn't speak, doesn't look around, just lets out a long, quiet breath. But inside, a small flame flickers, not of rage but of resolve. He knows this flight isn't over, and Catherine, with her smugness and scorn, has no idea she's just set herself on a collision course with a storm she won't escape. Meanwhile, up in first class, Catherine resumes her duties as if the encounter was a minor annoyance already forgotten. She flashes smiles at other passengers, pours drinks, checks seatbelts, her voice smooth and professional, like she didn't just spit on a man's shoes and hurl insults moments ago. To her, Samuel is a trivial problem she's dealt with, a nobody not worth a second thought. But she doesn't know, can't possibly know, that his short message has unleashed a ripple that will soon crash back and sweep away everything she thinks she controls. The hum of the plane's engines vibrates faintly through the floor as Samuel Jackson settles into the cramped economy seat, his small travel bag tucked beneath his feet. The window beside him frames a sliver of the darkening sky, the horizon bruising into shades of purple and gray. His hands rest on his knees, steady now, though the tremor from moments ago lingers in his memory, the tremor sparked not by fear, but by the sting of Catherine Evans's words and the wet smear of her spit still clinging to the edge of his polished shoe. He stares out at the wing, its sleek metal catching the last glints of daylight, and tries to anchor himself in the quiet anticipation he'd felt just minutes before boarding. That anticipation, of seeing Ethan, of feeling for once like he belonged somewhere beyond the margins, now feels like a fragile thread fraying under the weight of what just happened. He doesn't look back toward first class. He doesn't need to. The echo of Catherine's harsh laughter and the passenger's silent complicity burn in his chest like embers refusing to die. Up front, in the plush cocoon of first class, Catherine strides down the aisle with the confidence of someone who believes she owns it. Her heels snap against the floor, a rhythm of authority unbroken by the scene she just orchestrated. She adjusts her uniform, smoothing the fabric over her hips, and flashes a practiced smile at a businessman sipping champagne in 1C. "Anything else I can get for you, sir?" she purrs, her voice dripping with honey, a stark contrast to the venom she'd spat at Samuel. To her, the old man is already a footnote, a speck of dust she's brushed off her pristine world. She doesn't glance toward economy, doesn't spare a thought for the man she'd humiliated. In her mind, order has been restored, the unworthy intruder removed, her cabin unsullied. She pours herself a cup of coffee in the galley, the steam curling up as she takes a sip, savoring the bitter warmth like a small victory. But the victory is short-lived. Back in economy, Samuel shifts in his seat, the narrow space pressing against his knees. He reaches for his bag, intending to pull out his book again, something to steady his mind, but pauses when he feels the weight of eyes on him. A teenage boy across the aisle stares briefly before looking away, whispering to his mother. The woman nods, her lips pursed, but neither speaks to Samuel. He's used to this, the sidelong glances, the hushed judgments, but today they chafe more than usual. He exhales slowly, his breath a quiet release, and decides to check his phone. The screen lights up with Ethan's reply. "What do you mean they made you move?" Samuel's fingers hover over the keys, the memory of Catherine's scorn flashing fresh. "The attendant said there was a mix-up," he types, hesitating before adding, "She didn't even check properly. Just told me to get out." He hits send, unsure what Ethan will do with it, if anything. He only knows that the boy deserves to hear the truth about the gift he'd worked so hard to give. The plane hasn't even taxied to the runway when the energy shifts. Up front, Catherine is mid-sentence, offering a blanket to a woman in 3B, when the crackle of the intercom cuts through her words. "Miss Evans, please return to the galley immediately." The captain's voice is clipped, professional, but there's an edge to it that makes her pause. She straightens, her smile faltering for a split second, then recovers with a curt nod to the passenger. "I'll be right back," she says, her tone light, though her grip tightens on the blanket as she turns away. The first-class cabin watches her go, a few heads tilting with curiosity. She strides to the galley, heels clicking faster now, her mind racing through possibilities. A routine check, a minor delay, nothing she can't handle. She's dealt with worse. But what she finds isn't routine. The galley phone buzzes as she steps inside, and she snatches it up with a brisk, "This is Catherine." On the other end, a voice she doesn't recognize, deep, authoritative and unmistakably irritated, snaps her to attention. "Miss Evans, this is Flight Operations. We've received a direct complaint about your handling of a first-class passenger. Explain yourself." Her stomach lurches, but she forces her voice to stay steady. "There was an elderly man in 2A who didn't belong there," she says, her words clipped. "I checked his boarding pass, saw it was a mistake and moved him to economy. It's standard procedure." A lie, smooth and practiced, she hadn't checked anything beyond a glance, but she's banking on it holding. The silence on the line is deafening. Then the voice returns, colder now. "Did you verify his ticket in the system?" She opens her mouth, but the truth catches in her throat. She hadn't. She'd looked at him, his old suit, his worn shoes, his dark skin, and decided. She starts, but the voice cuts her off. "Did you confirm with the gate agent before you humiliated him?" Her throat goes dry. "No, sir," she admits, quieter now, the confidence draining from her. A heavy sigh crackles through the phone. You're to go back to him immediately, the voice orders. Check his ticket properly this time. If it's valid, you bring him back to first class. And you'd better pray it's not who I think it is. Catherine's hand trembles as she lowers the phone, her mind spinning. She doesn't want to believe it, can't believe it, but the sinking feeling in her gut tells her she's misjudged someone badly. She grabs a scanner from the galley counter, her movements sharp with irritation, and storms back down the aisle. The passengers sense the tension, their whispers growing as she passes, but she ignores them. She's not about to let some old fool make her look incompetent. Not on her flight. Samuel is still by the window in economy when she reaches him, her shadow falling over his seat like a storm cloud. He looks up, his calm eyes meeting her furious ones, and the contrast only fuels her rage. Give me your damn boarding pass again, you old bastard, she snaps, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Samuel blinks, surprised by her return, but he complies, reaching into his pocket with steady hands. He hands her the folded pass, the same one she'd dismissed before. Here, he says simply, his tone even. Catherine snatches it from him, her nails digging into the paper. She scans it with the device, her lips pursed tight, waiting for the beep that will prove her right, that he's a fraud, a stowaway, a nobody. But the scanner beeps green, the screen flashing valid, first class, seat 2A. Her breath catches, her eyes narrowing as she stares at the display, then at Samuel. This can't be right, she mutters, her voice trembling with disbelief. She flips the pass over as if expecting a trick, then in a fit of fury she grips it with both hands and rips it in half. The sound of tearing paper cuts through the cabin, sharp and final. You think you can fool me with this bullshit? She snarls, tossing the shredded pieces at his feet. You're a fucking liar. Samuel's jaw tightens, the first flicker of something breaking through his calm. He looks down at the torn pass, the gift from Ethan now scattered like trash, and a quiet ache blooms in his chest. That was my ticket, he says, his voice low but firm. My grandson gave it to me. Catherine scoffs, stepping closer, her heel deliberately grinding into his foot as she looms over him. The pain shoots up his leg, but he doesn't flinch, though his hands curl slightly on his knees. Your grandson? She mocks, her voice rising. What kind of pathetic loser buys a ticket for a dirty old fuck like you? You don't belong here and you never will. The cabin falls silent, the air thick with shock. A woman gasps softly a few rows ahead, clutching her armrest, while the teenage boy across the aisle stares wide-eyed, his phone half raised as if debating whether to record. Catherine isn't done. She grabs her coffee cup from the tray she'd brought, still steaming, and with a sneer she tips it over Samuel's lap. The scalding liquid soaks through his suit, burning his thighs, and he jerks slightly, his breath hitching. Oops, she says, her tone dripping with fake innocence. Guess you're even filthier now, huh? Get your ass up and stay where you belong, you disgusting piece of shit. Samuel's hands grip the armrests, his knuckles whitening, but he doesn't lash out. The coffee seeps into the fabric, the heat stinging his skin, and the torn boarding pass lies in tatters at his feet, a cruel mockery of Ethan's efforts. His shoes, one still smeared with her spit, gleam faintly under the overhead light, now marred by the brown stain of coffee. He feels the weight of every eye in economy on him, the humiliation sinking deep, but he doesn't break. He's endured worse, decades of slights, of being dismissed, of being less than, and he's learned to swallow it, to hold his head up even when the world tries to grind him down. But this deliberate cruelty, this destruction of something meant to honor him, cuts deeper than he wants to admit. Stand up, Catherine barks, her voice a whip crack. I said move, you worthless old prick. She steps back, her heel catching the edge of his shoe again, this time with enough force to bruise. Samuel winces, the pain sharp, but he doesn't rise immediately. Instead, he reaches into his pocket, pulls out his phone again, and types another message to Ethan, his fingers steady despite the chaos around him. She tore my ticket and spilled coffee on me. Says I'm lying. He sends it, then looks up at her, his eyes piercing through her rage with a quiet strength she can't fathom. You didn't have to do that, he says, his voice soft but resonant. I wasn't hurting anyone. Catherine's face twists, her fury boiling over at his calm defiance. Shut your fucking mouth, she spits, leaning in so close he can feel her breath. You think you can talk back to me? You're nothing, a nobody who crawled out of the gutter and thought he could play rich. I'll have you thrown off this plane, you miserable son of a bitch. She straightens, her chest heaving, and turns to storm back to the galley, leaving Samuel soaked, bruised, and surrounded by the wreckage of her contempt. The passengers around him shift uncomfortably. The woman who gasped now stares at her lap, her hands trembling while the teenager lowers his phone, his face pale. No one speaks, but the tension is palpable, a mix of shame, fear, and morbid fascination. Samuel brushes a hand over his wet trousers, the coffee cooling into a sticky mess, and picks up the torn pieces of his boarding pass. He holds them gently, like they're fragments of something sacred, and tucks them into his bag. His foot throbs where she stepped on it, his thighs burn from the spill, but his expression remains unchanged, stoic, unshaken, a man who's weathered storms far worse than this. Back in the galley, Catherine slams the coffee cup onto the counter, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She mutters curses under her breath, stupid old bastard, fucking trash, convinced she's in the right, that she's protected her domain from an imposter. She doesn't care that the scanner said the ticket was valid, she doesn't care that she's crossed the line. To her, Samuel is an affront, a blemish she's erased with righteous fury. She grabs a towel, wiping her hands as if to cleanse herself of him, and takes a deep breath, ready to resume her duties with her head held high. But she doesn't hear the storm brewing. In the cockpit, the captain's radio crackles again, this time with a voice that carries more weight, a voice from corporate, furious and unrelenting. "Get Evans up here now," it demands. "We've got a situation and it's bad." The captain exchanges a grim look with the co-pilot, knowing this isn't just a complaint, it's a reckoning. Catherine's actions, her spiteful escalation, have lit a fuse she can't see, and it's racing toward an explosion that will burn her world to ash. Samuel sits quietly, the damp fabric clinging to his legs, the torn pass hidden in his bag, and waits. He doesn't know what's coming, but he feels it, a shift in the air, a ripple of consequence. He's not a man who seeks revenge, he never has been. But today, for once, he won't have to. The truth, sharp and unyielding, is about to do it for him. The plane's engines rumble steadily now, a low growl vibrating through the walls as it taxis toward the runway, the cabin lights dimming in preparation for takeoff. In the economy section, Samuel Jackson sits motionless, his soaked trousers clinging uncomfortably to his thighs, the faint sting of the coffee burn still pulsing beneath the fabric. The torn remnants of his boarding pass, Ethan's gift, rest in his bag like a quiet wound, and his foot throbs where Catherine Evans's heel had ground into it. Yet his face betrays none of it. His eyes, steady and deep, gaze out the window at the tarmac rolling by, the airport lights streaking into blurred lines against the dusk. Around him, the murmurs of passengers have faded into an uneasy hush, their stolen glances darting toward him then away, as if he's a ghost they're afraid to acknowledge. He feels their weight, their pity, their guilt, but he doesn't meet their stares. Samuel has carried heavier burdens than this, and he knows how to bear them in silence. Up front, in the galley, Catherine leans against the counter, her breath steadying after her outburst. The towel she'd used to wipe her hands lies crumpled beside the empty coffee cup, its rim stained with the last drops she'd poured over Samuel. Her pulse still races, a mix of adrenaline and triumph surging through her veins. She'd won, hadn't she? She'd put that old man in his place, shredded his flimsy claim to her territory, and sent him limping back to where he belonged. The scanner's green light nags at the edge of her mind, but she shoves it aside. It was a glitch, a mistake, nothing more. She runs a hand through her hair, smoothing a stray strand back into place, and mutters to herself, "Fucking idiot, thought he could pull one over on me." A smirk tugs at her lips as she picks up a clipboard, ready to resume her checklist, her authority intact, or so she believes. But the air shifts, sharp and sudden like the crack of a whip. The galley phone buzzes again, its shrill tones slicing through her smug reverie. She freezes, her hand hovering over the clipboard, then snatches the receiver with a huff. "This is Catherine," she snaps, her voice edged with impatience. She expects the operations manager again, maybe a follow-up question she can brush off with another half-truth. But the voice on the other end isn't the same. It's deeper, smoother, and carries a chilling weight that sends a shiver down her spine. "Miss Evans," it says, each syllable deliberate, "this is Victor Langston, Chief of Operations. We need you in the cockpit. Now." Her stomach drops. Victor Langston, corporate brass, a name whispered in break rooms with equal parts awe and dread. He doesn't call mid-flight. Not unless something's gone terribly wrong. Catherine's mouth goes dry, but she forces a curt, "Yes, sir," before slamming the phone down. Her mind races as she smooths her uniform, her fingers trembling slightly. What the hell is this about? She'd handled the situation. Samuel was gone, problem solved. She steps out of the galley, her heels clicking with forced confidence, and strides toward the cockpit. The first-class passengers glance up, sensing the urgency in her gait, their whispers growing like static in the air. She ignores them, her jaw tight, her thoughts spinning. Maybe it's a delay, a mechanical issue. Anything but that old bastard. She reaches the cockpit door, raps twice, and steps inside, her posture rigid as she faces the captain and co-pilot. The captain, a grizzled man named Paul Grayson with decades in the air, swivels in his seat, his face a mask of stone. The co-pilot, younger and jittery, avoids her gaze, focusing on the controls. "Close the door," Grayson says, his voice low and unyielding. Catherine complies, the latch clicking shut with a sound that feels final. She opens her mouth to speak, but Grayson holds up a hand, silencing her. He presses a button on the console, and Langston's voice fills the small space, crackling through the speaker. "Is she there?" it asks, sharp and impatient. Grayson nods. "She's here." Catherine's heart pounds, a drumbeat of dread she can't ignore. Langston doesn't waste time. "Miss Evans, we've received a priority alert from Ethan Jackson, corporate partner, major investor and grandson of the man you just assaulted in my airline." His words hit like a punch, each one sinking deeper into her chest. Ethan Jackson, corporate partner, grandson. The pieces snap together, jagged and horrifying, and she feels the blood drain from her face. "Assaulted?" she stammers, her voice cracking. I just moved him." Langston cuts her off, his tone icy. "Don't play dumb. We've got passenger footage, your little tantrum's already on my desk. You tore his ticket, stomped on his foot and dumped coffee on him. Called him a dirty fuck, and worse. Ring any bells?" Catherine's knees wobble, but she grips the edge of a panel to steady herself. Footage. Passengers had recorded it. Her mind flashes to the teenager with the phone, the woman clutching her armrest. Silent witnesses now turned executioners. "I thought he didn't look like..." She stumbles, but Langston's laugh, cold and bitter, stops her dead. "Didn't look like what? Someone who belongs? Samuel Jackson's been flying with us for 30 years. First class more times than you've worked shifts. His grandson's one of the reasons you even have a paycheck. And you decided to treat him like garbage because of how he looked." The cockpit feels smaller, the walls closing in. Grayson's eyes bore into her, hard and unforgiving, while the co-pilot shifts uncomfortably, his fingers tapping nervously on the console. Catherine's throat tightens, her excuses crumbling before she can voice them. "I didn't know," she starts, but Langston's voice thunders through. "You didn't check. You didn't verify. You assumed, and then you attacked him, physically, verbally, in front of everyone. Ethan Jackson's on the line with the board right now, and he's not asking for an apology. He's demanding your head." Her breath catches, a ragged gasp she can't hide. "My head?" she whispers, the words barely audible. Grayson leans forward, his voice a low growl. "You've got 5 minutes to fix this, Evans. Go back there, find Samuel Jackson and bring him to his seat, personally. You will grovel if you have to. Because if he walks off this plane without that seat, you're not just fired, you're done in this industry." Langston adds, his tone final, "And when we land, you're mine. Corporate's waiting." The line clicks dead, leaving a silence so heavy it presses against her skull. Catherine stands frozen, her hands clenching into fists, nails digging into her palms. She wants to scream, to argue, to insist she was right, but the footage, Ethan's name, Langston's threat, they're a noose tightening around her neck. She'd misjudged everything, and now the ground beneath her is crumbling. Grayson jerks his head toward the door. "Move," he snaps. She turns, her legs leaden, and steps back into the cabin, the weight of every passenger's stare crashing over her like a wave. In economy, Samuel hasn't moved. The coffee has dried into a sticky stain on his suit, his foot still aches, and the torn pass sits like a silent accusation in his bag. He feels the plane's motion, the slow turn toward the runway, and wonders if Ethan got his messages, if they mattered. He doesn't expect anything to change. He's too used to swallowing these moments and moving on. But then he hears it, the staccato click of heels, faster now, angrier. He looks up, and there she is, Catherine, her face a storm of fury and fear, her eyes wild as she barrels toward him. "You," she hisses, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Get up. Now." Samuel blinks, his calm unshaken, but he doesn't move. "Why?" he asks, his tone soft, almost curious. Her hands shake as she looms over him, her breath ragged. "Because I said so, you stubborn old asshole. You're going back to first class. Move or I'll drag you there myself." The passengers around them stiffen, their eyes widening, some in shock, others in anticipation. The teenager pulls out his phone again, the red recording light blinking on. Samuel tilts his head, studying her. "You tore my ticket," he says, his voice steady, cutting through her bluster. "You said I don't belong." Catherine's face flushes red, her control slipping. "I don't give a fuck what I said," she snaps, leaning in close. "They're making me do this, so get your sorry ass up before I lose everything." Her words crack like a whip, but there's a tremor beneath them, a desperation she can't hide. Samuel doesn't flinch. He reaches into his bag, pulls out the shredded pieces of his pass, and holds them up, letting them dangle between his fingers. "This was from my grandson," he says, quiet but piercing. "You didn't just tear it. You tore what it meant." The cabin holds its breath. Catherine's eyes dart to the scraps, then back to him, and for a split second, something flickers across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear, but it's gone as fast as it comes. "I don't care about your sob story," she snarls, snatching the pieces from his hand and crumpling them into a ball. She throws it to the floor, grinding it under her heel. "Stand up or I swear to God." She stops, her voice catching as the intercom crackles again, Grayson's voice booming through. "Miss Evans, what's the holdup? Get him to his seat. Now." Her head snaps toward the sound, her chest heaving, then back to Samuel. "You heard him," she says, her voice breaking. "Move." Samuel looks at her, his gaze unwavering, and slowly rises. Not because she demands it, but because he chooses to. His suit is stained, his foot aches, but he stands tall, his dignity intact despite her efforts to strip it away. He picks up his bag, his movements deliberate, and steps into the aisle. Catherine grabs his arm, her grip tight, and starts pulling him toward first class, her heels stomping with every step. The passengers watch, a sea of eyes tracking their procession. Some whisper, some stare openly, and the teenager's phone follows them, capturing every second. Catherine's face burns, her humiliation growing with each step, but she doesn't let go. She drags Samuel past the divider into first class, shoving him toward 2A. "Sit," she barks, her voice hoarse. He lowers himself into the seat, adjusting his stained suit, and looks up at her, not with triumph, but with a quiet intensity that cuts deeper than any shout. "You happy now?" she mutters, her hands shaking. Samuel doesn't answer right away. He buckles his seatbelt, then meets her gaze. "You didn't have to do any of this," he says, his words simple but heavy. "Not to me. Not to yourself." Catherine flinches, his calm slicing through her defenses, but she has no retort. The intercom crackles again. "Miss Evans, report to the galley. Immediately." Grayson's voice is a guillotine and she knows it. She turns, her legs unsteady, and stumbles back toward the galley, the weight of the cabin's judgment crashing over her. Samuel sits still, the plane trembling beneath him as it prepares to lift off, and feels the shift, not just in the air but in the world around him. He doesn't gloat, doesn't revel. He's not that man. But as the engines roar and the ground falls away, he knows something Catherine doesn't. The storm she ignited has turned, and it's coming for her with a fury she can't outrun. In the galley, Catherine grips the counter, her breath shallow, her mind a whirlwind of panic. The phone buzzes again and she knows who it is before she picks it up. "This is Victor Langston," the voice says, cold and final. "You've got a lot to answer for when we land. Start praying, Evans." The line goes dead and she stares at the receiver, her world unraveling thread by thread. Outside, the plane climbs into the night, carrying Samuel toward his grandson, and Catherine toward her reckoning. The plane slices through the night sky, its engines a steady roar that drowns out the murmurs rippling through the cabin. The altitude climbs, the world below shrinking into a patchwork of flickering lights, but inside the air feels heavier than ever, a suffocating weight pressing down on every soul aboard. In first class, Samuel Jackson sits by the window, his stained suit a silent testament to the ordeal he's endured. The coffee has dried into a crusty map across his thighs, his foot pulses with a dull ache, and the memory of his torn boarding pass lingers like a bruise on his heart. Yet his face remains a portrait of calm, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes tracing the stars beyond the glass. He doesn't dwell on Catherine Evans's venom or the passenger's mute complicity. He's looking forward, to Ethan, to the embrace he's waited years for, and that quiet hope steadies him, even as the plane carries the echoes of chaos in its wake. In the galley, Catherine stands alone, her knuckles white as she grips the counter's edge. The phone receiver dangles from her hand. Victor Langston's parting words, "Start praying, Evans," ringing in her ears like a death knell. Her chest heaves, each breath shallow and jagged, as if the oxygen's been sucked from the room. The hum of the engines vibrates through her bones, but it's the silence within her, the deafening void of control slipping away, that threatens to swallow her whole. Her uniform, once a symbol of authority, feels like a straitjacket, the fabric clinging to her sweat-damp skin. She'd stormed back here after leaving Samuel in his seat, her legs trembling beneath her, her mind a frantic scramble of denial and dread. She'd won, hadn't she? She'd fixed it, dragged him back, followed orders. But Langston's voice, cold and unyielding, tells her otherwise. This isn't over. It's only beginning. The galley door swings open with a sharp creak and she flinches, her head snapping up. It's Hannah Carter, a junior flight attendant with wide eyes and a cautious step, her presence an intrusion Catherine doesn't want. "They're asking for you again," Hannah says, her voice soft but edged with something, pity maybe or unease. Catherine's lips curl into a snarl. "Who?" she snaps, though she already knows. Hannah hesitates, glancing toward the cockpit. "The captain. And someone else is on the line." Catherine's stomach twists, a knot of nausea tightening. She doesn't respond, just shoves the receiver back onto its cradle and brushes past Hannah, her shoulder clipping the younger woman's arm. "Mind your own damn business," she mutters, her voice a low growl, but it lacks the bite it once had, hollowed out by the fear clawing at her throat. The walk to the cockpit feels like a march to the gallows. The first-class passengers watch her pass, their gazes sharp and unrelenting, some with curiosity, others with a quiet glee she can't stomach. The businessman in 1C smirks over his champagne, a faint "serves her right," whispered to his seatmate. The woman in 3B clutches her blanket tighter, her eyes darting away as if afraid to be caught staring. Catherine keeps her head high, her heels clicking a defiant rhythm, but inside she's unraveling. Every step echoes Langston's threat, Grayson's command, and the image of Samuel's calm face, those piercing eyes that saw through her long before she understood the depth of her mistake. She reaches the cockpit door, her hand trembling as she knocks, and steps inside, the latch clicking shut behind her like a trap snapping closed. Captain Grayson doesn't turn this time. His focus stays on the controls, the plane's ascent steady under his hands, but his voice cuts through the hum of the cockpit. "You're late," he says flat and hard. The co-pilot, still avoiding her, taps nervously at a screen. Catherine opens her mouth to protest, but the radio crackles to life before she can speak, Langston's voice filling the space like a storm breaking. "Evans," he says, "you've got a hell of a mess on your hands. Passenger footage is hitting the network, live. You're trending and not in a good way." Her heart stops, a cold sweat breaking across her brow. "Live?" she chokes out, her voice barely a whisper. Grayson swivels now, his eyes locking onto hers, dark and unforgiving. "You didn't think they'd keep quiet, did you? That kid in economy streaming it. Corporate's watching. The board's watching. Ethan Jackson's watching." Catherine's legs buckle and she grabs the wall for support, her nails scraping the metal. Streaming. The teenager with the phone, she'd seen the red light, dismissed it as nothing. Now it's a spotlight, exposing her every word, every action to the world. I didn't mean," she stammers, but Langston's laugh, sharp and merciless, cuts her off. "Didn't mean to what? Rip apart a VIP's ticket? Burn him with coffee? Curse him out like a street thug? Save it, Evans. You've got bigger problems. Ethan's on with legal now, says he's got grounds for assault, defamation, you name it. And he's not backing down." Her vision blurs, panic surging like a tide. Assault. Defamation. Legal. The words spin in her head, each one a hammer blow cracking the foundation of her life. She'd thought she was in control, thought she'd put Samuel in his place, but now she's the one cornered, defenseless. "What do I do?" she asks, her voice small, pleading, a sound she barely recognizes as her own. Grayson leans back, his expression grim. "You start by facing him again," he says. "Corporate wants a public statement, on this flight before we land. You're going to stand up, admit what you did and beg his forgiveness. Live for every passenger to hear. And you'd better make it good because Ethan's not the forgiving type, and neither am I." Catherine's breath hitches, a sob threatening to break free, but she swallows it down. "Beg?" she whispers, the word tasting like ash. Langston's voice returns, colder than ever. "You heard him. You've got 10 minutes to prep. Screw this up and you're not just out of a job, you're out of a future. We'll see you on the ground." The line clicks off and Grayson points to the door. "Get out," he says, his tone final. She stumbles back into the cabin, her mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief, the walls of her world collapsing around her. The first-class cabin feels like a gauntlet as she re-enters, every eye a dagger aimed at her back. She doesn't dare look at Samuel, but she feels his presence in 2A, a quiet force that radiates through the space. She staggers to the galley, slamming the door behind her, and presses her forehead against the cool metal, her breaths coming in gasps. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage she's made. Her hands shake as she grabs a notepad, scrawling words she doesn't mean. Sorry, mistake, regret. They blur through tears she refuses to let fall, her pride warring with the terror clawing at her gut. She's never begged in her life, never had to, but now, the thought of facing Samuel, of groveling before him and the passengers she once commanded, twists her insides into knots. The intercom chimes, a soft ding that jolts her upright. Grayson's voice follows, calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're leveling off at cruising altitude. In a moment, one of our crew will address an earlier incident. Please give her your attention." The words hang in the air, a prelude to her execution. Catherine's hands tremble as she grips the intercom mic, her thumb hovering over the button. She can feel the passengers waiting, their anticipation a palpable force pressing against the galley door. She glances at Hannah, still lingering nearby, her eyes wide with something like sorrow. "You don't have a choice," Hannah says quietly, and Catherine wants to scream, to shove her away, but she knows it's true. She presses the button, the mic crackling to life, and her voice spills into the cabin. Shaky, unsteady, a shadow of the confidence she once wielded. "This is Catherine Evans, your flight attendant," she begins, her throat tightening. "Earlier there was an incident with a passenger in first class. Mr. Samuel Jackson." She pauses, the name burning her tongue, and forces herself to continue. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I misjudged him and I acted improperly. I'm deeply sorry for my behavior, and I ask for your understanding, and Mr. Jackson's forgiveness." The words choke her, each one a shard of glass she's forced to swallow, but she keeps going, her voice rising with desperation. "I didn't mean to cause any distress. Please, I beg you to accept my apology." The cabin falls silent, the hum of the engines the only sound as her plea hangs in the air. She releases the mic, her hand shaking so badly it slips from her grasp, clattering onto the counter. She doesn't dare step out, doesn't want to see their faces, their judgment, their scorn, but she knows they're there listening, watching. In 2A, Samuel sits still, his head tilted slightly as her voice fades. He doesn't smile, doesn't gloat, just listens, his fingers tracing the edge of his stained sleeve. The apology means nothing to him, not because he's unforgiving but because it's not his to accept. He knows who she's really begging, Ethan Langston, the faceless board holding her fate. And he knows it won't be enough. The galley phone buzzes again, sharp and insistent, and Catherine's heart leaps into her throat. She snatches it up, her voice a rasp. "Yes." Langston's tone is ice. "That was pitiful, Evans." Ethan's not impressed, says it's too little, too late. "And the board's already drafting your termination papers." Her knees buckle, a whimper escaping her lips. "Termination?" She echoes, the word a death sentence. "Effective on landing," Langston says. "Security's waiting at the gate. You're done." The line goes dead and the receiver slips from her hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Catherine slides down the counter, her back against the wall, her legs giving out beneath her. The galley spins, the walls closing in, and for the first time, tears break free, hot, silent streams cutting through her carefully applied makeup. She'd ruled this cabin for years, wielded power with a flick of her wrist, a sharp word, a cold stare. Now she's nothing, a name on a termination notice, a face on a viral video, a cautionary tale whispered in crew lounges. She thinks of Samuel, sitting calmly in the seat she tried to take from him, and a bitter sob rips through her. He didn't fight back, didn't raise his voice, and yet he's won without even trying. Outside, the plane cruises through the night, the stars a distant witness to the drama unfolding within. Samuel adjusts his seatbelt, his thoughts drifting to Ethan, to the life ahead. Catherine curls into herself, the galley a cage of her own making, her world reduced to the sound of her own ragged breathing. The flight stretches on, each minute a countdown to her end, and in the silence, the tension coils tighter, a storm still gathering strength before its final strike. The plane hums through the night, a steel bird slicing through clouds at 30,000 feet, its cabin bathed in the dim glow of overhead lights. The steady drone of the engines fills the air, but it does little to muffle the chaos brewing within. In first class, Samuel Jackson sits by the window, his stained suit a quiet badge of the indignity he's weathered. The coffee stains have hardened into dark patches across his thighs, his foot throbs faintly from the earlier assault, and the torn remnants of his boarding pass, Ethan's gift, rest in his bag like a relic of a battle he never chose to fight. Yet his posture remains unbowed, his hands resting calmly in his lap, his eyes fixed on the endless black beyond the glass. He's not thinking of Catherine Evans's venom or the passenger's silent stares. His mind is on Ethan, the boy who'd grown into a man, the grandson who'd given him this seat, the reunion that waits at the end of this flight. That quiet hope, fragile but unbroken, anchors him amidst the storms swirling around him. In the galley, Catherine crumples against the wall, her body sliding down until she's a heap on the floor. The phone receiver lies where it fell, Victor Langston's final words, "Security's waiting at the gate. You're done," echoing in her skull like a judge's gavel. Her breaths come in shallow, ragged gasps, her uniform clinging to her sweat-soaked skin, her once pristine makeup streaking down her face in black rivers of mascara. The galley, her former domain, feels like a tomb now, its stainless steel surfaces reflecting her distorted image, a woman unraveling piece by piece. She'd begged over the intercom, her voice cracking through the cabin, pleading for Samuel's forgiveness, for the passenger's mercy, but it hadn't mattered. Langston's verdict was final. Termination on landing, her career of 10 years reduced to ash in hours. Her hands clutch at her hair, pulling at the roots as if she could tear out the reality crashing over her, but there's no escaping it. She's lost everything, or so she thinks. The galley door creaks open and Hannah Carter steps in, her shadow falling over Catherine's crumpled form. "You okay?" Hannah asks, her voice soft but laced with a tension that betrays her calm facade. Catherine's head snaps up, her eyes wild, red-rimmed. "Do I look okay?" she snarls, her voice hoarse from crying. "They're firing me, Hannah. Firing me. After everything I've done for this damn airline." She slams her fist against the floor, the sound sharp in the confined space, but it's a hollow gesture, her strength drained, her defiance spent. Hannah kneels beside her, hesitant, then reaches out a hand. "You need to get up," she says. "The passengers, they're talking. And the captain wants you back out there." Catherine laughs, a bitter, broken sound that cuts through the hum of the plane. "Out there? To do what?" "Serve drinks," with a smile, "while they all watch me fall apart." She swipes at her tears, smearing them across her cheek, and shoves Hannah's hand away. "I'm done, don't you get it? They've got me on video, ripping his ticket, burning him, calling him, God, I can't even say it." Her voice cracks, a sob breaking through, and she buries her face in her hands. Hannah watches, her expression tightening. "You didn't know who he was," she says, almost a whisper. "But you knew what you were doing. And now it's too late." The words hit like a slap, and Catherine's head jerks up, her glare venomous. "Don't you dare lecture me," she hisses. "You think you're better than me? You'd have done the same damn thing if some old—" She stops, the insult dying on her tongue as a fresh wave of shame washes over her. Hannah stands, stepping back, her hands raised in surrender. "I'm not your enemy," she says. "But you've got to face this. They're not letting you hide in here." She turns to leave but pauses at the door. "And Catherine? Whatever's coming when we land, you brought it on yourself." The door swings shut behind her, leaving Catherine alone with the weight of those words. She drags herself to her feet, her legs trembling, and grips the counter to steady herself. Her reflection stares back from the metal surface, haggard, unrecognizable, a ghost of the woman who'd boarded this flight with a strut and a smirk. She'd ruled this plane, her word law, her presence a force no one dared challenge. Now she's a pariah, her power stripped bare by her own hands. She wipes her face with a trembling sleeve, trying to salvage some shred of composure, when a faint thud pulls her attention downward. Something's fallen to the floor, a small weathered wallet, its leather cracked and faded. It must have slipped from Samuel's bag during their earlier scuffle, unnoticed until now. She bends to pick it up, her fingers brushing the worn surface, and a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps spite, urges her to open it. Inside there's little, a faded ID with Samuel's name, a few crumpled bills, and a photo tucked into a worn plastic sleeve. She pulls it out, her breath catching as she studies it. It's old, the edges curling, the colors muted by time. A young man in a suit, smiling beside a boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. The man's face is familiar, too familiar, and her heart stutters as recognition dawns. Ethan. Or Ethan. The man she's set to marry next month, the one who'd proposed under a sky full of stars, promising her a life of luxury and love. She flips the photo over and there in faded ink is a scrawl, Ethan and me 1998. Her hands shake, the photo slipping from her grasp and fluttering to the floor as the truth crashes over her like a tidal wave. Ethan Jackson, her fiancé, her future, is Samuel's grandson. The man she'd humiliated, burned, cursed, whose dignity she'd trampled without a second thought, is the grandfather of the man she loves. Her knees buckle again and she sinks back to the floor, a keening wail escaping her lips. No, she whispers, clutching the wallet to her chest. No, no, no. The pieces snap into place with brutal clarity. Ethan's messages to Samuel, his fury with corporate, his push for her termination. It's personal now, not just business. She'd thought she'd lost her job, her reputation, but this is so much worse. She's lost him too, or she will when he sees that footage, when he hears what she did to the man who raised him. Her mind reels, memories flashing like a cruel montage. Ethan's warm laugh, his hand slipping a ring onto her finger, his stories about his grandfather, the quiet, strong man who'd taught him everything. She'd smiled through those tales, nodded along, never imagining that man would be the one she'd destroy on this flight. Oh God, she sobs, rocking back and forth, the wallet pressed against her forehead. What have I done? The regret is a living thing, clawing at her insides, shredding the last threads of her composure. She'd dreamed of a perfect wedding, white lace, champagne toasts, a life with a man whose wealth and charm promised her the world. Now that dream crumbles, replaced by the image of Ethan's face when he learns the truth. Disgust, betrayal, rejection. World reduced to the sound of her own ragged breathing. The flight stretches on, each minute a countdown to her end, and in the silence, the tension coils tighter, a storm still gathering strength before its final strike. The plane hums through the night, a steel bird slicing through clouds at 30,000 feet, its cabin bathed in the dim glow of overhead lights. The steady drone of the engines fills the air, but it does little to muffle the chaos brewing within. In first class, Samuel Jackson sits by the window, his stained suit a quiet badge of the indignity he's weathered. The coffee stains have hardened into dark patches across his thighs, his foot throbs faintly from the earlier assault, and the torn remnants of his boarding pass, Ethan's gift, rest in his bag like a relic of a battle he never chose to fight. Yet his posture remains unbowed, his hands resting calmly in his lap, his eyes fixed on the endless black beyond the glass. He's not thinking of Catherine Evans's venom or the passenger's silent stares. His mind is on Ethan, the boy who'd grown into a man, the grandson who'd given him this seat, the reunion that waits at the end of this flight. That quiet hope, fragile but unbroken, anchors him amidst the storms swirling around him. In the galley, Catherine crumples against the wall, her body sliding down until she's a heap on the floor. The phone receiver lies where it fell, Victor Langston's final words, security's waiting at the gate. You're done, echoing in her skull like a judge's gavel. Her breaths come in shallow, ragged gasps, her uniform clinging to her sweat-soaked skin, her once pristine makeup streaking down her face in black rivers of mascara. The galley, her former domain, feels like a tomb now, its stainless steel surfaces reflecting her distorted image. A woman unraveling piece by piece. She'd begged over the intercom, her voice cracking through the cabin, pleading for Samuel's forgiveness, for the passenger's mercy, but it hadn't mattered. Langston's verdict was final. Termination on landing, her career of 10 years reduced to ash in hours. Her hands clutch at her hair, pulling at the roots as if she could tear out the reality crashing over her, but there's no escaping it. She's lost everything, or so she thinks. The galley door creaks open and Hannah Carter steps in, her shadow falling over Catherine's crumpled form. You okay? Hannah asks, her voice soft but laced with a tension that betrays her calm facade. Catherine's head snaps up, her eyes wild, red-rimmed. Do I look okay? She snarls, her voice hoarse from crying. They're firing me, Hannah. Firing me. After everything I've done for this damn airline. She slams her fist against the floor, the sound sharp in the confined space, but it's a hollow gesture. Her strength drained, her defiance spent. Hannah kneels beside her, hesitant, then reaches out a hand. You need to get up, she says. The passengers, they're talking. And the captain wants you back out there. Catherine laughs, a bitter, broken sound that cuts through the hum of the plane. Out there? To do what? Serve drinks with a smile while they all watch me fall apart. She swipes at her tears, smearing them across her cheek, and shoves Hannah's hand away. I'm done, don't you get it? They've got me on video, ripping his ticket, burning him, calling him, God, I can't even say it. Her voice cracks, a sob breaking through, and she buries her face in her hands. Hannah watches, her expression tightening. You didn't know who he was, she says, almost a whisper. But you knew what you were doing. And now it's too late. The words hit like a slap, and Catherine's head jerks up, her glare venomous. Don't you dare lecture me, she hisses. You think you're better than me? You'd have done the same damn thing if some old... She stops, the insult dying on her tongue as a fresh wave of shame washes over her. Hannah stands, stepping back, her hands raised in surrender. I'm not your enemy, she says. But you've got to face this. They're not letting you hide in here. She turns to leave but pauses at the door. And Catherine? Whatever's coming when we land, you brought it on yourself. The door swings shut behind her, leaving Catherine alone with the weight of those words. She drags herself to her feet, her legs trembling, and grips the counter to steady herself. Her reflection stares back from the metal surface, haggard, unrecognizable, a ghost of the woman who'd boarded this flight with a strut and a smirk. She'd ruled this plane, her word law, her presence a force no one dared challenge. Now she's a pariah, her power stripped bare by her own hands. She wipes her face with a trembling sleeve, trying to salvage some shred of composure, when a faint thud pulls her attention downward. Something's fallen to the floor, a small weathered wallet, its leather cracked and faded. It must have slipped from Samuel's bag during their earlier scuffle, unnoticed until now. She bends to pick it up, her fingers brushing the worn surface, and a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps spite, urges her to open it. Inside there's little, a faded ID with Samuel's name, a few crumpled bills, and a photo tucked into a worn plastic sleeve. She pulls it out, her breath catching as she studies it. It's old, the edges curling, the colors muted by time. A young man in a suit, smiling beside a boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. The man's face is familiar, too familiar, and her heart stutters as recognition dawns. Ethan. The man she's set to marry next month, the one who'd proposed under a sky full of stars, promising her a life of luxury and love. She flips the photo over, and there in faded ink is a scrawl, Ethan and me 1998. Her hands shake, the photo slipping from her grasp and fluttering to the floor as the truth crashes over her like a tidal wave. Ethan Jackson, her fiancé, her future, is Samuel's grandson. The man she'd humiliated, burned, cursed, whose dignity she trampled without a second thought, is the grandfather of the man she loves. Her knees buckle again and she sinks back to the floor, a keening wail escaping her lips. No, she whispers, clutching the wallet to her chest. No, no, no. The pieces snap into place with brutal clarity. Ethan's messages to Samuel, his fury with corporate, his push for her termination. It's personal now, not just business. She'd thought she'd lost her job, her reputation, but this is so much worse. She's lost him too, or she will when he sees that footage, when he hears what she did to the man who raised him. Her mind reels, memories flashing like a cruel montage. Ethan's warm laugh, his hand slipping a ring onto her finger, his stories about his grandfather, the quiet, strong man who taught him everything. She'd smiled through those tales, nodded along, never imagining that man would be the one she'd destroy on this flight. Oh God, she sobs, rocking back and forth, the wallet pressed against her forehead. What have I done? The regret is a living thing, clawing at her insides, shredding the last threads of her composure. She dreamed of a perfect wedding, white lace, champagne toasts, a life with a man whose wealth and charm promised her the world. Now that dream crumbles, replaced by the image of Ethan's face when he learns the truth. Disgust, betrayal, rejection. The galley door bursts open again and Captain Grayson stands there, his silhouette towering against the light. Evans, he barks, his voice a whip crack. Get up. You're not done. She scrambles to her feet, the wallet tumbling to the floor, the photo landing face up at his boots. He glances down, his brow furrowing, but he doesn't ask. Corporate's on the line again, he says. They want you out there, now. Passengers are demanding answers, and Ethan Jackson's threatening to pull his stake if we don't handle this right. Catherine's breath hitches, her eyes darting to the photo. Ethan? She whispers, her voice breaking. Grayson's gaze sharpens, suspicion flickering. You know him? He asks, but she can't answer. Her throat's too tight, her mind too fractured. He grabs her arm, pulling her upright, his grip bruising. Move, he orders, dragging her into the cabin. The passengers turn as one, a sea of eyes boring into her, Some angry, some gleeful, all merciless. Samuel sits in 2A, his head tilted toward the window, but he shifts slightly as she passes, his calm gaze meeting hers for a fleeting moment. She freezes, the weight of his stare crushing her, and then she sees it, the resemblance to Ethan in his eyes, his jaw, a quiet strength she'd been too blind to notice. Her legs give out and she stumbles, Grayson catching her before she falls. "Stand up," he growls, shoving her forward to the intercom. She grips the mic, her hands trembling so violently she nearly drops it. The cabin watches, breathless, as she presses the button, her voice a ragged whisper amplified through the speakers. "This is Catherine Evans," she starts, choking on her own name. I need to say something. To Mr. Jackson. To all of you." She pauses, tears streaming down her face, and forces the words out. "I didn't just make a mistake today. I destroyed something, someone, who didn't deserve it. I was cruel, I was wrong, and I can't undo it. Mr. Jackson, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were to him." Her voice cracks, the mic slipping as she sobs, and Grayson yanks it from her hand, cutting the feed. The cabin erupts. Whispers, gasps, a few sharp claps from passengers relishing her downfall. Samuel turns back to the window, his expression unchanged, but his fingers tighten briefly on his armrest. He doesn't need her words, they're not for him. They're for Ethan, for the life she's shattering with every passing second. Grayson drags her back to the galley, shoving her inside. "Stay here," he snaps. "You're off duty, permanently." The door slams shut and she collapses again, the photo staring up at her from the floor. Ethan's smile a silent accusation. Her mind fractures, a torrent of panic and regret drowning her. She sees the wedding, her dress, the flowers, Ethan's vows, slipping away, replaced by a future of shame, unemployment, and loneliness. "He'll leave me," she whispers, clawing at the floor, her nails scraping the tile. "He'll hate me." The thought of facing him, of seeing the love in his eyes turn to loathing, is more than she can bear. She'd built her world on his wealth, his status, her own arrogance. And now it's gone, all because she couldn't see past her own prejudice. She doesn't know how to fix it, doesn't know if she can. Will he forgive her? Will he still marry her, knowing what she did to the man he idolizes? Or will he walk away, leaving her with nothing but the wreckage of her own making? The plane begins its descent, the cabin tilting as the ground rushes closer. Samuel adjusts his seatbelt, his thoughts on Ethan, on the life ahead, unshaken by the chaos behind him. Catherine curls into a ball, the photo clutched to her chest, her sobs echoing in the empty galley. The landing gear whines, the wheels touch down, and the plane slows to a stop, but for her there's no end to the fall. Security waits beyond the jet bridge, her termination looms, and Ethan, her Ethan, will soon know everything. The cabin door opens, passengers shuffle out, and she's left alone, a broken woman with a future hanging by a thread. And here's where we pause, a story unfinished, a fate unwritten. Will Catherine find redemption, or will Ethan turn his back on her forever? Can she salvage her dream wedding, or is it lost to the ashes of her actions? The ending's up to you, dear listeners. Do you want to see part 2 of this tale unfold? Head to the comments below and let us know. Subscribe to Soul Deep Stories on YouTube to catch the next chapter, or drop a comment with how you'd like this story to end. Should Catherine fight for forgiveness or face the consequences alone? Tell us what you think. Your voice shapes the journey. Until next time, stay tuned and keep those soul deep stories alive.